I never believed in coincidences, at least, not the kind that feel too perfectly timed, as if the world itself pauses just to rearrange the pieces of your life. But that night, when I first saw Emma, I couldn't convince myself it was just chance. It was late, close to closing time, and the small coffee shop on the corner of Oak Street was almost empty. The lights were warm, casting golden pools across the polished wooden floor. Outside, the city was quiet for once. A fine mist hung in the air, blurring the neon signs across the street. I had stopped in for no particular reason, maybe to avoid going home to my empty apartment, maybe just to warm my hands around a cup of coffee that I didn't really need. She was there already. I noticed her as soon as I stepped inside. She sat by the window, her fingers wrapped around a white ceramic mug, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the glass, not really at the street, but through it, as though she could see something no one else could. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulder, and though there was nothing particularly striking about her clothes, an oversized sweater, dark jeans, something about her made the entire room bend toward her. I ordered my drink, sat at a table across from hers, and tried not to stare, but of course, I failed. Every few moments, my eyes drifted back to her, studying the way she absently traced the rim of her mug with one finger, the way her lips parted slightly as if she were about to speak but thought better of it. And then she looked at me. It was the briefest glance, almost accidental, but in that moment I felt the weight of it, as though she'd pulled me into her silence. Her eyes were a shade I can't quite name, gray, maybe, with hints of blue, but they carried a heaviness, a story, something unspoken. I looked away first, embarrassed at being caught, but when I turned back, she was still watching me, not smiling, not frowning, just observing, as if trying to decide something. "Long day?" I asked finally, because silence felt unbearable. Her lips curved, barely, you could say that. Her voice was soft, low, like music you almost miss if you're not listening carefully. I hesitated, then nodded toward the empty chair at her table. "Mind if I?" She glanced at the chair, then back at me. For a moment I thought she might say no, and I braced myself for rejection, but she didn't. She shrugged, and that was enough. I sat down across from her, my cup warming my palms. For a moment we said nothing, and it was strange, because silence with strangers is usually sharp, uncomfortable, something you want to fill. But with her, it was different. It was heavy, but not in a bad way. It felt like the silence already meant something, as if we'd skipped the small talk and moved straight into the part that mattered. "Do you come here often?" I asked, wincing at how cliché it sounded. "Sometimes," she said. She lifted her mug, her nails painted a pale color that almost matched the porcelain. "When I need to be somewhere else." "Somewhere else?" Her eyes flicked toward the window again, where the mist thickened under the glow of the streetlights. "Not here, not home, just out." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood. "I get that." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Do you?" The corner of her mouth lifted, like she didn't believe me, but she didn't press. I wanted to ask her name, but part of me was afraid that the moment I did, the spell would break, that she'd tell me, I'd introduce myself, and we'd both become ordinary people again, two strangers making small talk in a coffee shop. But she must have read my hesitation, because she spoke first. "Emma," she said simply, as if offering me a secret. I repeated it in my head, then let it roll off my tongue. "Emma, I'm Daniel." She nodded once, then lowered her gaze to the coffee she'd barely touched. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty, it was full, and I knew, without understanding why, that this was not the kind of encounter you forget. The coffee shop grew quieter as the minutes passed. One by one, the other customers left, until it was just the two of us and the barista behind the counter, who looked like she was counting the seconds until she could close. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft clinking of cups were the only sounds left. Emma still hadn't touched her drink. She kept turning the mug slowly in her hands, as if she were waiting for it to reveal something. You don't like coffee? I asked, nodding toward her untouched cup. She gave a small smile. I like the idea of it, but sometimes I just order it to have something in front of me. Easier than explaining why you're sitting alone. I chuckled. That's fair, though now it looks like you were just waiting for me. She raised an eyebrow, amused but not fully smiling. You sound confident. Just hopeful, I said, and to my relief, that earned me a real, if fleeting, smile. For a while, we talked about nothing in particular. Books we had read, movies we liked, places in the city that felt worth visiting. It was the kind of conversation that usually feels shallow, but with her it didn't. Every answer she gave hinted at something deeper, as if behind her words there was a different story she wasn't ready to tell. When I asked where she was from, she hesitated. Not far, she said finally, but it doesn't matter. I've moved around a lot. Looking for something? I asked. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, sharp and unblinking. Maybe, or maybe just running from things I don't want to find again. There was a weight in her voice that silenced me. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, pretending to understand, though part of me knew I couldn't. The barista began cleaning up more aggressively, making it clear we didn't have long before she asked us to leave. Emma noticed and set her mug down, finally letting go of it. Do you walk home? She asked. Usually, yes, I replied. It's not far from here. She nodded, then stood, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. Then maybe we can walk together, just for a bit. The suggestion surprised me, but I didn't hesitate. I'd like that. We stepped outside, and the mist had thickened into a soft drizzle. The air smelled of rain and asphalt, and the streetlights glowed like halos through the damp air. Emma didn't open an umbrella. She just tilted her face slightly upward, as though she welcomed the rain. I kept pace with her as we walked down Oak Street. The silence between us felt less heavy now, more comfortable, almost companionable. So, Daniel, she said after a while, what do you do when you're not talking to strangers in coffee shops? I smiled at her choice of words. I'm an architect, or at least I'm trying to be, still working my way through projects that feel less important than what I want to do. But someday, maybe. Her eyes flicked toward me with interest. What is it you want to do? I hesitated. No one had asked me that in a long time. Design something that matters. Buildings that people don't just walk through, but feel. Places that leave a mark on them. I don't know if that makes sense. It does, she said softly, more than you think. Her words carried an understanding I couldn't quite explain, as though she knew exactly what it meant to want more than what life was giving. And you? I asked. What do you do? She smiled, but it was different this time, sad, almost. Nothing worth mentioning. Try me. She shook her head. It's not a job. Not really. I've done a lot of things. None of them permanent. Temporary work, temporary homes, temporary people. Her words lingered in the air, heavier than the rain. You don't stay anywhere long? I asked. No, she said simply. I never do. We reached an intersection where the streetlights buzzed faintly overhead. Emma stopped, turning toward me. The glow of the light caught in her hair, making her look almost unreal in that moment. Like someone you might see once and then spend years wondering if you imagined them. You should probably go home from here, she said quietly. I frowned. Why? Where are you going? Just somewhere else, she replied, echoing her words from earlier. Then she glanced at me, her expression unreadable. But thank you, for tonight. And before I could say anything more, she stepped off the curb and walked away, disappearing into the rain. I stood there, watching until the mist swallowed her. For the first time in years, I didn't want the night to end. For the next several days, I caught myself walking past the same coffee shop, almost without meaning to. Each time, I half expected to see Emma again, sitting by the window with her untouched drink. She never was. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. People come and go in cities all the time, and usually you never think twice about them. But Emma was different. She had left something behind, Some presence that clung to me like a memory that refused to fade. On the fourth evening, just as I convinced myself to stop looking for her, I saw her, not in the cafe this time, but on the steps of the old library across the square. She was sitting alone, her sweater pulled tight around her shoulders, a book open in her lap though her eyes weren't on the pages. I hesitated before walking over. Part of me worried she'd think I was following her, though the truth was I'd barely stopped thinking about her at all. "Emma?" I said softly as I approached. Her head lifted slowly, and for a moment her expression was unreadable. Then, a flicker of recognition. "Daniel." She said my name as though testing its weight, then she closed the book and set it aside. "You walk past here often?" I laughed awkwardly. "Only when I'm hoping to see someone I thought I wouldn't see again." Something passed over her face, amusement, maybe, or maybe just surprise. "Then maybe you're luckier than most." I sat down beside her, the stone steps cold beneath me. For a moment neither of us spoke. The city was loud around us, buses hissing to a stop, voices drifting from across the square, but here on the steps, it felt like a quiet corner of the world. "Why the library?" I asked finally. "It's a place no one asks questions," she said. "People come, sit, leave. No one wonders why you're alone." Her words carried the same undertone as in the cafe, as if she were always preparing to explain her solitude before anyone asked. "Do you read much?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Enough, though sometimes I just hold the book and let my mind wander. Words are only half the story, the rest is what you carry with you." There was something in the way she said it that made me wonder what stories she carried, what parts of her past weighed on her so heavily that she never stayed in one place. Before I could ask, she shifted slightly toward me. "Daniel, why did you come over?" The question caught me. "Because I wanted to," I said honestly. She studied me, as though measuring the truth of my words. Then she gave the smallest nod. "Most people don't stay," she said softly, "even when they say they will." "I'm not most people." Her eyes lingered on mine for a long time, and I felt something unspoken pass between us, something fragile, like a thread you're afraid to pull too hard in case it breaks. Finally, she picked up the book she'd been holding. She showed me the cover, the collected poems of Mary Oliver. "You read poetry?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "Sometimes it's the only thing that feels true. Everything else changes, but a poem, once it's written, it's always the same." I smiled. "I never thought of it that way." "You should," she said, her voice almost a whisper. For a while, she read a few lines aloud, her voice quiet but steady. The words seemed to take on new meaning as they passed through her, as if she wasn't just reading them but living them. I listened, and though the city noise surrounded us, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just her voice, the sound of rain beginning again in the distance, and the two of us sitting close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm against mine. When she finished, she closed the book and looked at me. "Do you believe people are meant to meet, or do you think it's all chance?" The question lingered between us like the echo of her voice. "I think," I said slowly, "that sometimes chance feels too much like intention to ignore." She studied me for another long moment, then smiled, softly, almost reluctantly. "Maybe, or maybe we just want to believe that." And yet, she didn't stand up, didn't walk away this time. Instead, she leaned back slightly against the cold stone steps, and for the first time, it felt like she might actually let herself stay. The next day, it rained, not the heavy storm kind of rain, but a steady drizzle that seemed to linger endlessly. I thought about Emma most of the morning, replaying the way she had leaned back on those library steps, as though she'd finally given herself permission to breathe. By afternoon, I gave in to the impulse. I went back to the square. She was there again, this time standing under the awning of a small bookstore. Her hair was damp, strands clinging to her cheeks, and she held no umbrella. She seemed lost in thought, staring at the glass display of books as if it contained answers. "Emma," I called softly. She turned, startled at first, then her expression softened. "Daniel, you find me everywhere, don't you? Or maybe you let yourself be found." I said. She tilted her head slightly, as though the idea amused her. Maybe. We stood under the awning, watching the rain blur the outlines of people hurrying past. For a moment neither of us spoke. It felt strangely natural, being next to her, as if silence was its own kind of language. Finally, she asked, "Do you like walking in the rain?" "I don't mind it, as long as I'm not alone." Her eyes lingered on me, then she stepped off the curb into the drizzle. "Then walk with me." I hesitated only a second before following her. We didn't use umbrellas, didn't hurry. We simply moved together through the wet streets, our shoes splashing lightly in shallow puddles. She seemed lighter in the rain, almost carefree, as though the world's weight had loosened its grip on her. At one point she even stretched her arms slightly outward, letting the drops fall against her face. She laughed softly, and the sound was so unguarded it caught me by surprise. "I used to do this as a child," she said, "run out into storms, just to feel small against something bigger. My mother hated it." "And now?" I asked. Her smile faded a little. "Now I don't run, but sometimes I still let myself feel small." We turned onto a quieter street where the buildings leaned close together, their windows glowing warmly against the gray. Emma slowed, glancing at one of the cafes tucked into the corner. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded, though it wasn't about the coffee. It was about staying close to her. Inside, the cafe smelled of cinnamon and damp coats. We found a table in the back, away from the window. Emma shook the rain from her hair and wrapped her hands around the warm cup when it arrived. For a long time, she said nothing. "Emma," I said gently, "you don't always have to explain yourself. You can just be." Her eyes lifted to mine, searching. "What if I don't know how to just be?" I leaned forward slightly. "Then I'll sit here with you until you remember." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You make it sound easy." "Sometimes it is." She looked down at her coffee, then back up. "Why are you doing this, Daniel? Why not just leave me alone like everyone else?" The question cut deeper than I expected. "Because I don't want to. Because you matter." She stared at me for a long moment, and in her silence I sensed both fear and longing, as though she wanted to believe me, but didn't quite dare. Then, softly, she said, "No one has ever said that to me before." The words hung between us, fragile and raw. I reached across the table, not to take her hand, but just to let mine rest closer to hers, close enough that she could choose. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then her fingers shifted slightly, brushing against mine. The touch was fleeting, but it was enough. We sat like that while the rain tapped steadily on the windows, and for the first time I felt the walls Emma kept around herself begin to lower. Not gone, but thinner, enough for me to see through. The rain finally cleared by the next morning, leaving the city washed clean. The air smelled of wet stone and leaves, and the sky had that pale brightness that comes after a storm. I wasn't sure if I would see Emma again, yet my steps carried me back toward the square almost without thought. She was there. This time, she wasn't leaning against a wall or hiding beneath an awning. She was standing by the fountain, arms folded, looking at the rippling water. When she noticed me, she didn't seem surprised. "Daniel," she said simply, as though she had been waiting. "Emma." I hesitated. "Did you want me to come?" She tilted her head slightly. "Would it matter if I said no?" "It would," I answered, "but I'd stay anyway." That earned me the smallest flicker of a smile. "Then yes, I wanted you to." We walked together without destination, letting the streets guide us. The city seemed softer that morning, quieter, as if still recovering from the storm. Eventually, our path led us toward the river. A long stone bridge stretched across it, wide enough for carriages once, now shared by cars and pedestrians. Emma slowed as we reached the center, her gaze fixed on the water far below. She gripped the railing tightly. "I used to come here when I needed to think," she said, "or when I didn't want to think at all." Her voice carried something heavier this time. I waited, letting her choose whether to continue. She glanced sideways at me. "Have you ever stood somewhere high and thought about, what if I leaned forward? What if I let go?" The question struck me with quiet force. I didn't answer right away. "Yes," I said finally. "I've thought it, but I never wanted the fall more than the ground I was standing on." Emma's grip tightened. "Sometimes the fall feels easier." I stepped closer, not touching her, but making sure my presence filled the space between her and that edge. "Maybe easier," I said softly, "but easier isn't the same as better." She exhaled slowly, her breath shaky. "You talk like someone who's never been tired of themselves." "You'd be surprised," I replied. For a long while, we stood there. The river moved beneath us, steady, unbothered, carrying its weight away. Emma finally loosened her hold on the railing. Her knuckles, pale a moment before, regained their color. She turned to me, eyes clearer now. "Why don't you ask questions, Daniel? Everyone else wants answers from me. You don't, because maybe the answers aren't ready yet," I said, and forcing them out would only break them. Her lips pressed together, then softened. "You make patience sound like a kind of strength." "It is," I said. We left the bridge and wandered back into the winding streets. Emma seemed quieter, but not with the silence of distance, more like the silence of someone carrying too many words inside, unsure which ones to release first. When we reached a small park, she sat down on a bench, gesturing for me to join her. Children ran nearby, chasing each other with shouts and laughter, their joy echoing through the open air. Emma watched them intently. "I used to think life had to be complicated," she murmured, "like if it wasn't heavy, it wasn't real." "And now?" I asked. "Now I don't know. Maybe simple moments are the only real ones." I nodded, letting the sound of the children's laughter fill the pause. Then she turned to me, her voice low. "Daniel, will you promise me something?" "Anything," I said. "Don't stop showing up, even if I try to push you away." Her words caught me off guard, but I answered without hesitation, "I won't." For the first time since I'd met her, she reached out fully, her hand resting on mine, steady this time, not fleeting. And in that small, simple gesture, I felt the fragile line between us turn into something real. The days began to blend together after that. Emma and I met often, sometimes by chance, sometimes because one of us couldn't resist seeking the other out. Our conversations ranged from the light and ordinary, coffee shops, music, the odd quirks of the city, to the heavy and unspoken things that seemed to weigh on her more than she admitted. But there were moments when she withdrew again, her gaze turning inward as though she were staring at something only she could see. One evening, we found ourselves walking along a quieter part of town. The shops were closing, lights dimming, the streets nearly empty. Emma led us down a narrow alley that opened into a forgotten courtyard. A single lamp glowed there, its weak light illuminating cracked stone and ivy climbing the walls. She stopped, leaning against the wall, her expression distant. "Daniel," she said, her voice softer than the air between us. "There are things about me I haven't told you, things I'm not proud of." I waited. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away. "When I was younger, I thought running would save me, running from home, from people, from myself. But the past, it doesn't stay where you leave it." Her hand traced the wall behind her as though she could carve the memory into stone. "I hurt people," she whispered, "not in the way you think, but I walked away when they needed me most. I thought I was protecting them from me. Maybe I was just protecting myself." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, sharp, searching. "Do you still want to stand here, knowing that?" I stepped closer. "Emma, everyone carries shadows. You don't scare me." Her breath caught. For a second, I saw fear flicker through her expression, not fear of me, but of what she had just allowed herself to reveal. "I don't deserve," she began. "You don't get to decide that," I interrupted gently. "None of us does." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It felt like a thread pulled tight, connecting us across the dark. Finally, she laughed softly, though it was more like a sigh. "You make it too easy to believe you, and that's dangerous. Or maybe it's necessary," I said. We left the courtyard and wandered back toward the livelier streets. The city was alive again with voices and music drifting from open windows. Emma's steps seemed lighter, though I could tell she was carrying more inside than she let show. At the corner, she stopped and turned to me. "Daniel, I don't know how long I'll stay. I never stay anywhere too long. But if I disappear, you won't," I said quickly. She tilted her head, almost smiling. "You can't know that." "No," I admitted, "but I can hope, and I can keep showing up, like I promised." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I felt that she believed me. The next days carried an almost fragile rhythm. Emma and I fell into a pattern: long walks, lingering conversations, moments of silence that felt heavier than words. Sometimes it seemed as if we were circling around something neither of us dared to name. One afternoon, we sat on the steps of an old library. The building loomed above us, its stone facade weathered but dignified, its heavy doors closed for the evening. Emma hugged her knees, gazing at the empty square before us. "Do you ever wonder," she asked suddenly, "if we're just pretending? That maybe what we think we're building is just smoke?" I turned toward her. "Do you feel like it's smoke?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Some days it feels real. Some days it feels like I'm just playing a part." Her words hit something inside me. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that life itself sometimes seemed like a role we kept rehearsing without ever stepping onto the real stage. But I didn't want to weigh her down with my own shadows. Instead, I said, "Even if it's a part, you're not playing it alone." She looked at me then, her eyes searching, and for a moment the world seemed to quiet around us. Later that evening, we stopped by a small cafe that Emma claimed had the best tea in the city. Inside, the dim yellow lights cast everything in warmth. Old posters covered the walls, mismatched chairs filled the corners, and the air smelled of cinnamon and something faintly floral. Emma rested her chin in her hands, watching me with a faint smile. "You're strange, Daniel. You don't push. Most people want to fill every silence with noise, but you let it breathe." "Maybe silence says more than words sometimes," I replied. Her smile deepened, but then she looked down at the table, tracing circles on the wood. "You make it sound simple, but it's not. Being with someone, it always ends with me leaving, or them leaving." I leaned forward slightly. "And if it didn't? If, for once, you stayed?" She froze, as though the idea itself was dangerous. Her fingers stilled on the table. "That's not how it works for me," she said quietly. "I don't stay. I can't." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I didn't argue. I only said, "Then let's not decide tonight. Let's just finish our tea." She laughed softly, but her eyes glistened. For the rest of the evening, we didn't touch the subject again, but I carried her words with me, the way you carry a fragile glass, careful not to let it break. The days grew colder, though winter was still a distant shadow. Emma began wearing long scarves, wrapping them loosely around her neck, the fabric trailing like whispers in the wind. I noticed how she tugged at them absent-mindedly when she was nervous. We started spending more time in quiet places, half-empty bookshops, forgotten courtyards, benches tucked beneath bare trees. Each space seemed to mirror us, half-empty, waiting for something unspoken. One evening, as the city dimmed into twilight, we walked along the river. The water caught the last light of day, trembling with gold and blue. Emma's steps slowed, and finally she stopped by the railing, leaning against it as though she were holding something heavy inside. "I should tell you something," she said softly. I waited, but she didn't continue. Instead, she gripped the railing tighter, her knuckles pale. "Emma," I whispered, "you don't have to if it hurts." She shook her head. "No, that's the problem. I keep not saying things. I keep carrying them until they crush me." The wind caught her hair, pulling it across her face. She didn't move it aside. "I've left before," she finally said. "Not just people, but whole lives, places. Every time things started to feel real, I ran. And each time I told myself I had a reason, but maybe the reason was always me." Her voice cracked at the last word. I stood beside her, unsure whether to reach for her hand or let her keep her distance. Finally, I said, "You're here now. That's what matters." She turned her head, her eyes wet, but she smiled faintly. "You always make it sound so easy." It's not easy, but maybe it doesn't have to be impossible either. For a long time we stood there in silence, the river carrying its restless song beneath us. When Emma finally straightened, it was as though she had put some of the weight down, even if only for the night. The next week unfolded in fragments, as if life itself hesitated with us. Emma avoided certain questions, and I pretended not to notice, yet the air between us carried the weight of all the unsaid things, like a room where someone has just left but their presence lingers. One night, as rain tapped gently against my window, she came over without warning. Her coat was damp, her hair scattered with drops. She didn't speak at first, just stepped inside, set her bag down, and stood there as though she had been walking for miles to get here. I made tea. She didn't touch it. Instead, she walked to the shelf where I kept my old photographs, images of cities I had visited, strangers I had met, moments I had wanted to trap in paper so they wouldn't fade. She touched one photo lightly, a narrow street in Lisbon, evening lights glowing. "You always look for permanence," she whispered. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Photos, words, even the way you look at me sometimes, as if you're trying to save me before I'm gone." I didn't know how to answer, so I said the only thing I could, "Maybe I'm just afraid of losing what matters." Emma turned to me then. Her eyes were clear, almost too clear. "And what if what matters doesn't stay? What if it chooses to leave?" The silence between us pulsed, sharp and fragile. I wanted to tell her I wouldn't let her go, but the words felt like chains. Finally, Emma crossed the room. She stood so close I could hear her breath, see the tremor of her lips. "I don't want to run anymore," she said, "but I don't know if I can stop myself." I lifted my hand, brushed the wet strands of hair from her cheek. "Then let me stand still with you, just for tonight. No promises, no future, just here, now." Her eyes closed, and when she leaned against me, it was not surrender, it was a fragile kind of trust, like glass resting in my hands. Morning came too quickly. Emma was still asleep on the couch, the faintest smile resting on her lips, as if the night had given her a rare kind of peace. I sat nearby, watching the grey light spill across the floor, trying to memorize everything, the shape of her hand, the rhythm of her breathing, the quiet that belonged only to us. When she finally stirred, she didn't look surprised to see me awake. She simply whispered, "I wish this moment could last." And for a second, I almost lied. I almost told her it would. But honesty pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't ignore. "Emma," I said softly, "we both know life doesn't wait. It takes, it changes, but maybe we can choose what to carry with us." She looked at me then, truly looked, as if searching for an answer in the lines of my face, and what she found must have been enough, because her hand slipped into mine, steady and deliberate. We didn't make promises. We didn't need to. Later, when she left my apartment, she paused in the doorway. "If I run again," she said, "find me." I nodded, though we both knew I might not be able to. Yet in that moment, her words were enough to carve themselves into me, permanent and unshakable. The door closed. The room felt different, emptier, yet alive with the echo of her presence. And as I stood there, holding nothing but silence, I realized something. Love is not about keeping someone forever. It's about standing still long enough to let them change you. Emma had changed me, and no distance, no silence, no future could take that away.